On March 14, 1853, somewhere along the Mississippi River corridor in Louisiana, inside a parish courthouse, a transaction occurred that official auction records would omit deliberately for more than a century. A pregnant woman was sold for not $12, just 12, the cost of a loaf of bread. According to court documents, the sale was entirely legal, witnessed by 7 men whose signatures remain on the deed of sale to this day. Nevertheless, before or after that day, the woman's name was never entered into any parish registry. During courthouse renovations in 1897, local historians uncovered the receipt sealed inside a wall, and they immediately rain-teared it. Written on the back of that receipt was something that led them to choose silence rather than truth. Tonight, we uncover what stayed hidden and why the descendants of those 7 witnesses worked for generations to ensure this story perished with them. Before we go further into what unfolded inside that Louisiana courthouse, I need you to do something. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell, because narratives like this one, the stories they attempted to bury, deserve to be told. And I'm curious, where are you tuning in from at this moment? Put your state or city in the comments. Let's see just how far these buried histories extend. The transaction that morning in March wasn't some anomaly born of chaos or misunderstanding. It was intentional, calculated, and completely lawful under the regulations governing Louisiana before the Civil War split the nation. In 1853, St. Helena Parish was a place where Spanish moss hung so heavily from the live oaks that daylight barely touched the ground. The air carried tastes of river silt and smoke from sugar cane, and the region's wealth wasn't measured by acres alone, but by human lives. Positioned in the fertile stretch between Baton Rouge and the Mississippi border, the parish sat close enough to the river to prosper, yet isolated enough to guard its secrets well. Greensburg, the parish seat, consisted of whitewashed buildings clustered around a courthouse square where business was conducted with near religious formality. Each Saturday, the courthouse steps served as an auction block. Furniture, livestock, land, and people exchanged owners with the same bureaucratic efficiency. The auctioneers understood their trade, the buyers recognized their financial boundaries. And everyone was aware that whatever happened on those steps was lawful, sanctioned by custom, and backed by men who saw themselves as the architects of civilization itself. That spring, 3 specific men held considerable sway in St. Helena Parish. Judge Amos Crenshaw presided over the district court with near scriptural authority. At 62, he had spent 4 decades interpreting laws written first and foremost to safeguard property. His rulings shaped the parish gradually, inevitably, like a river molds its banks with a force that appeared natural. Next in influence, though equally ambitious, stood Duncan Fairholme, a plantation owner whose family had commanded more than 4,000 acres of top cotton land since Louisiana's statehood. 47 years old, educated in Charleston, fluent in French, and ruthlessly business-minded, Fairholme oversaw Belmont, his plantation, with the help of an overseer named Silas Guthrie, a man whose reputation for brutality kept the enslaved population in line through sheer terror. The third figure in this triumvirate of power was Nathaniel Pute, the parish tax assessor and recorder of deeds. Younger at 39, Pute was eager for status in a society where family lineage meant everything and his own counted for nothing. He had arrived from Virginia armed with forged letters of introduction and a realization that amid westward expansion, a person could reinvent themselves if willing to do what others wouldn't. These 3 men converged on the morning of March 14th because of a woman whose existence they had methodically erased from every record they managed. Her name was Clara. Approximately 23 years earlier, she had been born on a Virginia tobacco plantation. The word approximately matters here. Enslaved individuals were often denied even the dignity of recorded birth dates. At 15, she was sold south, torn from her mother and 2 younger siblings one Tuesday morning in late summer at a Richmond auction house. The buyer was Edmund Fairholme, Duncan's father, who died of cholera in 1849 and left his entire estate, including 47 enslaved people, to his son. At Belmont, Clara worked in the main house. She was quick with numbers, could read despite laws against it, and carried a quiet dignity that Duncan Fairholme first noticed, then resented, and eventually sought to crush. In October 1852, Clara became pregnant. She never spoke the father's name aloud, and she didn't need to. Everyone in the main house understood. The enslaved women who worked beside her understood. Duncan Fairholme's wife Margaret understood. And Duncan himself knew with a certainty that filled him with such rage he could barely look at Clara without his hands trembling. Because the father wasn't Duncan, it was his younger brother, William. William Fairholme was everything Duncan wasn't. Duncan was severe, William laughed easily. Where Duncan saw human beings as agricultural assets, William recognized the fundamental evil of the system he benefited from but lacked the courage to resist. 28 years old, unmarried, William lived in the overseer's cottage at the edge of Belmont's property, supposedly managing the northern fields but mostly drinking and reading abolitionist literature smuggled from New Orleans. His relationship with Clara began with conversation. She brought meals to the cottage twice daily. He asked about her life before Belmont. She answered cautiously at first, then with growing honesty as she realized he listened differently than other white men. Over months, conversation turned into something else, something that crossed every boundary their world had constructed. When Clara's pregnancy became noticeable in late December, William did something unprecedented. He approached his brother and offered to purchase Clara's freedom. That conversation took place in Duncan's study on a Saturday evening. No written record captures what was said, but what followed was documented with exacting precision. Duncan refused the offer, more than refused, he was insulted by it. In his view, William had violated the sanctity of property rights, endangered the racial hierarchy on which their entire society rested, and shamed the Fairholme name in a way that could ruin their standing if word got out. William argued that he loved Clara, that the child was his, that they should be allowed to go north, to a free state, to build a life beyond Louisiana law's reach. Duncan's response was to immediately sell Clara. Not to a slave trader who might take her far away, beyond William's reach, that would be too simple, too merciful. Duncan wanted his brother to watch, to witness, to understand what Duncan termed William's betrayal. He arranged for Clara to be included in a public auction scheduled for March 14, a routine sale of property seized for unpaid debts. On the courthouse steps, in full public view, entirely legal. But Duncan added a condition that exposed the depth of his cruelty. He set Clara's minimum bid at 12 cents. That amount was intentional. In 1853, the typical price for an enslaved woman of childbearing age in Louisiana ranged from $800 to $1,200. By pricing her at 12 cents, Duncan achieved several aims at once. He demonstrated that Clara held no value to him. He humiliated William by showing that the woman he professed to love was worth less than a newspaper. And most cunningly, he ensured no legitimate buyer would bid. In the economy of slavery, price signaled quality. A woman offered for 12 cents must be damaged, diseased, unfit for labor. No plantation owner would risk even a minimal investment on such obvious refuse. Duncan knew exactly one person would bid. His plan wasn't to sell Clara to a stranger. It was to sell her to someone who would make sure her suffering continued in ways William couldn't prevent. He was selling her to Silas Guthrie, his overseer. The night before the auction, William Fairholme vanished. He left no note, took no horse, simply walked away from Belmont sometime after midnight and was never seen in St. Helena Parish again. Some said he went north to join abolition movements in Boston. Others claimed he drowned in the Mississippi, unable to live with his powerlessness. A few whispered that Duncan had him killed and buried in the cane fields, where dozens of enslaved people already lay in unmarked graves. The truth was simultaneously simpler and more disturbing. William had gone to Judge Crenshaw's home in the pre-dawn hours and offered him everything he owned, roughly $3,000 in inheritance and land rights, for a single favor. He wanted the judge to invalidate the sale, to declare it unlawful on some technicality, to buy William time to find another solution. Judge Crenshaw listened to William's plea with the expression of a man watching a child explain why the sky ought to be green rather than blue. When William finished, the judge asked one question: "Did your brother sign the proper deed of sale?" William admitted he had. "Then the transaction is legal," Crenshaw said. "Your grief does not supersede property law. Good evening, Mr. Fairholme." William left that house understanding that every institution, every law, every powerful man in the parish would side with Duncan. Not because they were cruel, though many were, but because allowing William's sentiment to override Duncan's property rights would threaten the entire foundation of their economy. If love could supersede ownership, the system would collapse. Clara spent her last night at Bellamont in the quarters, encircled by women who braided her hair and sang songs older than Louisiana, older than America, songs carried from Africa in the bellies of ships. They knew they would likely never see her again. They understood what men like Silas Guthrie did to women they owned. One of them, an elderly cook named Bethy who had survived 50 years of bondage, pressed a small cloth bundle into Clara's hands. Inside lay a knife, barely longer than Clara's palm, wrapped in oilcloth. "You hide this," Bethy whispered. "You hide it good. And when the time comes, you do what needs doing." Clara nodded. She understood. The knife wasn't for self-defense. It was for mercy. For her child, if things became unbearable. For herself, if no other escape existed. That night, she sewed it into the hem of her dress, her fingers steady despite the fear that tasted like copper in her mouth. The auction began at 10 o'clock in the morning under skies so gray they seemed to mirror the moral character of everything happening beneath them. Roughly 40 people gathered in the courthouse square. Most came for livestock and furniture. A few arrived specifically for the human merchandise. Nathaniel Pute stood on the courthouse steps with the deed of sale in his hands, reading from it in a voice designed to carry across the square. He described Clara with the same inflection he used for describing a lame horse. Female, age approximately 23 years. House-trained, literate, though such skill is of questionable value. Currently with child. Minimum bid 12 cents. A murmur rippled through the crowd. 12 cents. Something was wrong with this one. Several men who had been prepared to bid immediately lost interest. Why risk investment on obviously defective property? Silas Guthrie stood near the front, his hat pulled low, his expression unreadable. He waited for the crowd to disperse, for the moment when no one else would bid, when he could purchase Clara for the pittance Duncan had arranged, when she would become his property to do with as he pleased. But something unexpected happened. A man near the back of the crowd raised his hand. 12 cents, he called out. Every head turned. The man was a stranger, tall, thin, wearing a traveler's coat dusty from the road. His face was weathered in a way that suggested years of outdoor labor, but his bearing was wrong for a field hand. He stood too straight, looked people in the eye too directly. Nathaniel Pute hesitated. "You are bidding 12 cents for this property?" "I am." "Your name, sir?" "Isaiah Mercer." Pute glanced toward Silas Guthrie, who was staring at the stranger with an expression of genuine confusion. This wasn't part of the plan. Duncan had arranged for Guthrie to be the only bidder. Who was this man? "Do you have 12 cents, Mr. Mercer?" Isaiah Mercer approached the steps, reached into his pocket, and placed 12 copper pennies on the podium where Pute stood. "I do." From his position near the courthouse door, Judge Crenshaw watched this exchange with growing interest. He had been present at the auction specifically to ensure Duncan's plan proceeded smoothly. But now an unknown variable had entered the equation. Pute looked desperately toward Silas Guthrie. The overseer's face had gone red. He understood what was happening. If he bid 13 cents, he would reveal his interest. He would make public what was supposed to be a quiet transaction. Duncan had specifically instructed him to wait until no one else bid, to make it seem like he was doing Bellamont a favor by taking worthless property off their hands. But if he didn't bid, Clara would go to this stranger. The seconds stretched. The crowd waited. Finally, Silas Guthrie spoke. 13 cents. Isaiah Mercer didn't hesitate. 25 cents. 50 cents, Guthrie snapped. $1. The crowd was riveted. This wasn't how these auctions typically proceeded. Something peculiar was happening. Two men bidding against each other for a woman being sold at refused prices. What did they know that everyone else didn't? Silas Guthrie bid $2. Isaiah Mercer bid $5. At $10, Guthrie stopped. Not because he lacked funds, but because Duncan had given him specific instructions: do not overpay, do not draw attention. The whole point was to acquire Clara quietly, to make it seem insignificant. But it was no longer insignificant. $10 once, Nathaniel Pute called out, his voice uncertain. $10 twice. He waited, looking toward Judge Crenshaw for guidance. The judge gave a small nod. Sold to Mr. Isaiah Mercer for $10. Clara, who had been standing to the side of the courthouse steps throughout this entire exchange, her hands bound in front of her, her pregnancy visible beneath the thin dress she wore, looked at the men who had just purchased her. Isaiah Mercer met her gaze. And though his expression didn't change, Clara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Recognition. The deed of sale was signed within minutes. Isaiah Mercer paid the $10 in coins he counted out carefully onto Pute's desk. Judge Crenshaw witnessed the transaction with his signature. By law, Clara was now the legal property of a man she had never met until that morning. But the irregularity of the sale had attracted attention. As Mercer led Clara away from the courthouse, moving quickly toward a wagon waiting at the edge of the square, Duncan Fairholme emerged from inside the courthouse, where he had been watching through a window. "Mr. Mercer," Duncan called out. His voice was sharp, accustomed to obedience. "A moment of your time." Isaiah Mercer stopped. He didn't release Clara's arm. When he turned to face Duncan, his expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Fairholme. You are not from this parish." "I am not." "What brings you to St. Helena?" "Business." Duncan took a step closer. He was trying to place this man, trying to understand what had just happened. The auction was supposed to be controlled, predictable. This outcome was neither. "What sort of business?" "My own sort," Mercer replied. His voice was quiet but firm. The transaction was legal. The judge witnessed it. "Unless you have some objection to the sale." It was a challenge phrased as a question. Duncan recognized it immediately. If he objected, he would need to provide grounds. And what grounds could he offer? That he had deliberately undervalued Clara to humiliate his brother. That he had arranged for his overseer to purchase her for purposes Duncan preferred not to state publicly. "No objection," Duncan said slowly. "Though I am curious. What do you intend to do with property you purchased for such a price?" "That is my business, Mr. Fairholme." "Good day." Isaiah Mercer turned and continued toward the wagon. Clara walked beside him, her mind racing. Nothing about this made sense. This man had bid against Silas Guthrie, had paid $10, a significant sum, for a woman being sold as refuse. And when she had looked into his eyes, she had seen something that terrified her more than anything that had happened in the past 4 months. He knew who she was. Not just her name, not just her situation. He knew her. They reached the wagon, a simple farm cart with a canvas cover. Mercer helped her climb into the back, his touch impersonal but not rough. Then he climbed onto the driver's bench, took up the reins, and urged the horse forward. They rode in silence through Greensburg, past the storefronts and houses, past the church with its white steeple, past the boundary where cultivated land gave way to pine forest. Only when they were well beyond sight of the town did Isaiah Mercer speak. "You do not remember me." Clara's voice was cautious. "Should I?" "Richmond. August 1845. You were 15 years old. I was there the day you were sold." Clara's blood went cold. "You were at the auction." "I was." Mercer kept his eyes on the road. "I was working for a man named Ephraim Dalton, a slave trader. I drove his wagons, managed his property. I watched you and your family stand on that block. I watched your mother scream when they separated you. I watched Edmund Fairholme pay $700 and lead you away. Then you are no different than the rest of them," Clara said, her voice hard. "I was no different," Mercer corrected. "I am no longer that man." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Without taking his eyes from the road, he handed it back to Clara. "Read it." Clara unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was a deed of manumission, a document that, when properly executed and filed, would grant freedom to an enslaved person. The name on the document was hers. Clara, no last name, because she had never been granted one, but her description matched her age, the scar on her left forearm from a childhood burn. At the bottom of the document, and signed, was a space for the owner's signature. Isaiah Mercer's signature. "I do not understand," Clara whispered. "8 years ago, I watched your family destroyed on an auction block," Mercer said. His voice was steady, but something beneath it might have been shame or grief, or both. "I told myself I was just doing a job, that I was not responsible for the system, that I was just a small part of a large machine. Then one night in New Orleans, I watched Ephraim Dalton beat a man to death over $5. I watched him do it slowly. And I realized that every person who participates, no matter how small their role, makes the machine function. So I left. I went north. I worked with people who were trying to dismantle what I had helped build." He paused, navigating the wagon around a fallen branch. 3 months ago, a man came to a meeting in Cincinnati. His name was William Fairholm. He told us about a woman in Louisiana who was carrying his child. He told us his brother was going to sell her to an overseer known for brutality. He gave us the date and location of the auction. He asked if anyone could help. Clara's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "William sent you." "He paid me," Mercer said, "not to purchase you. He paid me to bring you north to a safe house in Illinois. To a place where you and your child can be free." Clara stared at the deed in her hands. Freedom. The word felt foreign. Impossible. A promise that had been weaponized against enslaved people for so long that she no longer trusted it. "Where is William now?" she asked. Mercer's silence answered before his words did. "He died 2 weeks ago. Fever," they said. "He was in Kentucky trying to arrange passage for others. The people I work with, they think it might not have been fever. They think someone from Louisiana tracked him down." Clara closed her eyes. William, reckless, idealistic William, who had read her poetry and promised her things that could never be. William, who had at least tried, which was more than most men in his position would ever do. "Duncan had him killed," she said. "It wasn't a question. We cannot prove it, but yes. I believe that." Just when we thought the worst of this story was behind us, when it seemed Clara might finally find freedom, the true horror of what happened in St. Helena Parish is about to reveal itself. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. The wagon continued north through the afternoon, following roads that grew increasingly rough and remote. Mercer explained the route they would take. They would avoid main roads, travel mostly at night, rely on a network of safe houses operated by free black families and sympathetic whites. It would take weeks to reach Illinois, months before Clara would be truly safe. But something was wrong. Clara couldn't articulate it precisely, but years of survival had taught her to trust her instincts. And her instincts told her that Isaiah Mercer was lying. Not about everything. His story about Richmond might be true. His shame might be genuine. But something about this rescue felt staged, performed, as though he was following a script written by someone else. She thought about the auction, about how perfectly timed Mercer's arrival had been, about how he had known exactly when and where to bid, about how easily he had outmaneuvered Silas Guthrie. Too easy. Duncan Fairholm didn't make mistakes. He planned everything with the precision of a general deploying troops. If he had wanted Clara to go to Guthrie, she would have gone to Guthrie. Unless Duncan had wanted something else to happen. The realization settled over Clara like ice water. This wasn't a rescue. This was a hunt. They camped that night in a clearing several miles from the nearest settlement, deep enough in the forest that firelight wouldn't be visible from the road. Mercer built a small fire and offered Clara dried meat and cornbread. She ate mechanically, her mind working through possibilities. If Duncan wanted her dead, he could have had her killed at Belmont. Simple, quiet. Enslaved women disappeared regularly. No one questioned it. But Duncan didn't want her dead. He wanted William destroyed completely. And William was already gone, already beyond Duncan's reach. So Duncan needed something else. He needed proof that William's betrayal had consequences. He needed the child Clara carried to suffer. And more than that, he needed it to be William's fault. The escape was designed to fail. Mercer wasn't rescuing Clara. He was delivering her to something worse than Silas Guthrie. Somewhere along this route, they would be intercepted. Slave catchers, probably men who would claim Clara was a runaway. The deed of sale would be declared fraudulent. Clara would be returned to Duncan under circumstances that would make her fate seem like justice rather than cruelty. And because William had arranged this escape, because he had paid for it, because he had involved abolitionists in a conspiracy to steal property, Duncan would be able to say that his brother had brought about Clara's suffering. That William's sentiment had made things worse, not better. It was perfect revenge. The only question was when the trap would spring. Clara waited until Mercer had settled on the opposite side of the fire, his back against a tree, his head pulled low. She waited until his breathing deepened. Then she carefully reached into the hem of her dress and retrieved the knife Bethy had given her. The blade was small but sharp. She tested the edge against her thumb, felt it bite. She could kill him right now while he slept. It would be easy. But then what? She was pregnant, alone, somewhere in Louisiana forest with no money, no map, no allies. Even if she made it to a road, she would be captured within days. A pregnant black woman traveling alone would be stopped, questioned, returned to whoever claimed ownership. The knife wasn't the answer. But maybe honesty was. "I know this is not real," Clara said quietly. Mercer didn't move. For several seconds, she thought he might actually be asleep. Then he pushed his head back and looked at her across the fire. "Explain." "Duncan planned this. He wanted me to try to escape. He wanted it to fail. You are part of that plan." Mercer's expression didn't change. "Why would I agree to such a plan? Money or safety? Maybe Duncan threatened to expose you for helping runaways. Maybe he offered to pay you more than William did. I don't know why, but I know this is not what you told me it was." The fire crackled between them. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Finally, Isaiah Mercer spoke. "You are smarter than William gave you credit for." Clara's grip tightened on the knife. "So I am right." "Partially." Mercer sat forward, his elbows on his knees. "Yes, Duncan knows about this escape. Yes, he planned for it to fail. But you are wrong about why I am helping him." "Then why?" "Because if I did not, someone else would. And that someone else would deliver you directly to slave catchers who would hurt you in ways I will not describe. Duncan gave me a choice: lead you north and let his men intercept us in a way that leaves you physically unharmed, or refuse and watch him give the job to men who would make you wish you had never been born." Clara laughed bitterly. "So you chose the merciful betrayal." "I chose to give you a chance." "What chance?" "You just said we will be intercepted." "We will be. Tomorrow afternoon, approximately 20 miles north of here. 4 men will be waiting on the road. They will have papers declaring you a fugitive. They will have authorization from Judge Crenshaw to return you to Belmont. And legally, they will be completely within their rights. Then I have no chance." "You have exactly one chance," Mercer said. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather pouch. He tossed it across the fire to Clara. "There is $150 in that pouch. There is also a letter of introduction to a family in Natchez, free people of color who can help you disappear. Not north. North is where Duncan expects you to run. Go south, to New Orleans, then by ship to Mexico. It is a longer route, more dangerous, but it is possible." Clara opened the pouch. The money was real. The letter was real. "Why would you do this?" because I meant what I said earlier. I'm not the man I was in Richmond. And because William Fairholme, whatever his faults, tried to do something decent. I will not let Duncan Fairholme turn that decency into a weapon. But you are still going to betray me. You are still going to let Duncan's men intercept us. They are going to intercept someone, Mercer corrected. It does not have to be you. He stood and walked to the back of the wagon. When he returned, he was carrying a bundle of clothing, women's clothing, a dress similar to Clara's but larger. A shawl. A bonnet. There is a settlement 8 miles south of here. Small place, mostly free black families and poor whites. There is a woman there named Ruth Chambers. She is approximately your height, your complexion, and she is dying. Consumption. She has perhaps weeks left. I spoke with her yesterday. I paid her family $50 to help us. Clara stared at him. I do not understand. Tomorrow morning, you take this money and these clothes. You walk south to the settlement. You tell the Chambers family that Isaiah sent you. They will hide you until the men looking for you have passed through the area. Then they will help you get to Natchez. From there, you follow the letter's instructions. And you. Ruth Chambers will take your place in this wagon. She is too ill to walk more than a few steps, but she can sit upright in a bonnet and shawl. From a distance, she will look enough like you. When Duncan's men intercept us tomorrow, they will take her. By the time they realize their mistake, you will be gone. Clara's mind reeled. Ruth will die. Ruth is already dying. And her family needs money to bury her properly, to care for her children. This way, her death serves a purpose. This is insane. This is your only chance, Mercer said flatly. Duncan has men watching every route north. He has money and power and the law on his side. You cannot fight him directly. You can only disappear so completely that he cannot find you. Clara looked down at the knife in her hand. Then at the money. Then at Isaiah Mercer, whose face was half-shadowed by firelight. If I do this, if I run, Duncan will know you helped me. He will come after you. He will try, Mercer agreed. But I am harder to catch than you are. And I have friends who can make me disappear, too. Why? Clara asked. The word came out broken. Why would you risk this for me? Mercer was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than it had been all day. In Richmond, when they separated you from your mother, you did not scream. You did not fight. You stood on that block and you looked at the men bidding on you with an expression that said you knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of. You were 15 years old, and you had more dignity than any of them would ever possess. I have seen that expression in my dreams for 8 years. It is time I did something to earn the right to forget it. Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Crying was a luxury enslaved women couldn't afford. Tears were interpreted as weakness, as submission, as evidence that they had accepted their condition. She had learned early to keep her grief internal, to let it calcify into something harder. There is something else you should know, Mercer continued. His voice had dropped lower, as though the forest itself might be listening. About Duncan Fairholme. What about him? William told us things before he died. Things about his brother, about Bellamont. Mercer paused, choosing his words carefully. You were not the first. Clara's blood went cold. The first what? The first woman Duncan sold to Silas Guthrie. There were 3 others. Over the past 5 years. All of them house servants. All of them young. Duncan would arrange some minor infraction, some excuse to remove them from the main house. Then he would sell them to Guthrie at auction. Always for suspiciously low prices. Always legally documented. Always witnessed by Judge Crenshaw. What happened to them? 2 died within a year. 1 from injuries Guthrie claimed were accidental. The other from what was called fever, though the enslaved people at Bellamont said she had been beaten so badly she never recovered. The 3rd woman, her name was Sarah, disappeared entirely. Guthrie claimed she ran away. No one ever saw her again. Clara thought of Bethy, the elderly cook who had given her the knife. Bethy would have known these women, would have watched them disappear one by one, would have understood exactly what fate awaited Clara if she ended up in Guthrie's possession. Why would Duncan do this? Clara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Because he could, Mercer said simply. Because the law gave him absolute power over the people he owned. And absolute power reveals what men truly are. Duncan Fairholme is a man who enjoys the suffering of others, particularly women who show intelligence or dignity or any quality that threatens his sense of superiority. And Judge Crenshaw allowed this. Judge Crenshaw facilitated it. Every sale was legal. Every transfer of property properly documented. The judge never asked why these women were being sold so cheaply. Never questioned the pattern. He simply signed the papers and collected his fees. Clara looked down at the knife in her hand. 3 women before her. All of them destroyed by the same mechanism. All of them erased from history as thoroughly as if they had never existed. William knew about this. He discovered it about a year ago. Found records in Duncan's study. That was when he started reading abolitionist literature. When he started believing the system itself was the problem, not just individual cruelty within it. He tried to convince Duncan to free the enslaved people at Belmont. Offered to forfeit his own inheritance if Duncan would release them. Duncan laughed at him. Mercer fed another branch to the fire. When you became pregnant, William saw it as his chance to do something right. To save at least one person from the machine. He contacted abolitionists in Cincinnati, paid them everything he had, made arrangements for your escape. But Duncan found out how. We think someone in Cincinnati betrayed us. Someone who sold information to slave catchers, who then sold it to Duncan. By the time William realized the escape plan was compromised, it was too late. Duncan had already restructured the whole auction to ensure you would end up exactly where he wanted you. Then why did William go to Kentucky? If he knew the plan had failed. Mercer's jaw tightened. Because he was trying to find another way. He thought if he could reach the Underground Railroad network, if he could get messages to conductors who operated in Louisiana, he could arrange a secondary rescue, something Duncan would not anticipate. But Duncan found him first. Duncan's reach is longer than any of us understood. He has connections to slave catchers across 5 states, men who make their living hunting human beings. When William started asking questions in Kentucky, someone reported it. 3 days later, William was dead. Clara absorbed this information slowly. William, foolish and idealistic. William had tried, had actually tried. More than that, he had kept trying even after his first plan failed. That had to count for something, even if it ultimately accomplished nothing. The fever they said killed him, Clara asked. What really happened? We will never know for certain. His body was found in a boarding house in Louisville. The proprietor said William had been sick for 2 days, complained of stomach pain, vomiting, died in his sleep. But one of the abolitionists who saw the body afterward said William's fingernails were blue. His lips were discolored. Those are signs of poisoning, not fever. Duncan poisoned his own brother, or paid someone to do it. Either way, William became a problem Duncan needed to eliminate. And Duncan is very good at eliminating problems while keeping his own hands clean. Clara thought about this, about a man so consumed by the need for control that he would murder his own blood relative, about a system that gave such men power and called it civilization. If Duncan could kill William and make it look natural, Clara said slowly, then he could kill you, too. You understand that? Yes. This plan, sending me south while Ruth takes my place, it will only work if Duncan believes you were genuinely trying to help me escape. If he suspects you deliberately failed him, you are a dead man. I know. Then why risk it? Mercer looked at her directly. Because I am tired of being the person who looks away. I am tired of telling myself that I'm just following orders, just doing a job, just trying to survive in a system I did not create. Every person who makes that excuse, who chooses their own safety over someone else's suffering, makes the system stronger. I cannot dismantle slavery by myself. But I can save one person. I can do one thing that matters. It was, Clara realized, the same logic that had motivated William. The same futile, beautiful logic that got idealistic people killed. But it was also the only logic that ever changed anything. Clara made her decision. I will go south, she said. But I need to know something first. The Chambers family. How did you find them? How did you arrange this? I have been traveling through Louisiana for 3 months, preparing for your escape. I made contacts in several communities. Offered money to families who might be willing to help. The Chambers family was one of 3 who agreed. 3 families. You planned multiple escape routes. I planned for contingencies. Duncan is not the only one who can think several moves ahead. Clara felt something shift inside her. This man, this stranger who had participated in her family's destruction 8 years ago, had spent 3 months preparing to save her, had risked his life to create options, had thought through scenarios and backup plans with the same meticulous care Duncan applied to his cruelties. Perhaps redemption wasn't a single dramatic gesture. Perhaps it was the slow, methodical work of becoming someone different than you had been. What about Ruth? Clara asked. When Duncan's men realize they have the wrong woman, what will they do to her? Nothing, Mercer said. She will already be dying. By the time they discover the switch, Ruth will likely be unconscious or delirious from fever. They cannot torture someone who is that far gone. And they cannot prove she willingly participated in a deception. For all anyone knows, I made an honest mistake. I believed Ruth was you. Duncan will not accept that explanation. Duncan does not have to accept it. He just has to acknowledge that he cannot prove otherwise. And without proof, even Duncan Fairholme has limits to what he can do publicly. Clara wasn't entirely convinced, but she had no better alternative. She thought about Ruth Chambers, a woman she had never met, who was sacrificing her final days to give Clara a chance at freedom. It was a debt that could never be repaid. I want to meet her, Clara said, before I leave. I want to thank her. That is not wise. The less you know about each other, the safer.